Rain had been falling for hours before anyone noticed the unmarked sedan parked at the edge of the sheriff's lot. It was early morning, the kind of washed-out Pacific Northwest dawn where the sky never truly brightens, only softens into shades of ash and steel. Inside the building, most people had not yet arrived for their shifts. Only a few lights burned through the windows, pale rectangles against the layered clouds. In one of the basement rooms, a door stood partially open. A pool of faint blue light spilled across the hallway floor, flickering with the irregular pulse of an aging desk monitor. A stale draft drifted up from the vents, carrying the old scent of paper, dried adhesive, and cardboard that had absorbed nearly 30 years of coastal moisture. On the metal table beneath the monitor, a single evidence box sat open. Beside it lay a pair of latex gloves, a capped scalpel, and a clear plastic evidence bag that had not been touched since the previous century. The bag held a coil of nylon zip tie, stiff and discolored, preserved under a layer of thin, fogged plastic. It was older than some of the deputies upstairs. The handwritten tag on it, still legible in faded black ink, carried a date no one had spoken aloud in years. The name of the case, once the source of nightly news broadcasts and late-night theories in log-in camps and diner booths, had long since drifted into silence. Yet here it was again, illuminated by the monitor's glow, as if waiting for someone to breathe life back into it. Detective Marin Kestrel stood over the table with her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Her breathing had settled into a measured rhythm, the same one she used during search warrants and arraignment hearings. She wasn't touching anything yet. She simply studied the zip tie, its ridged plastic surface frozen in time, bearing the imprint of a crime that had never truly let go of this region. A clock ticked somewhere beyond the doorway. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past the lot, sending a tremor through the concrete floor. The detective didn't move. She had been waiting for this morning for months, perhaps years, though she would never admit it. The basement air shifted again as someone descended the stairway. Slow footsteps, deliberate, echoing softly between the narrow walls. A figure appeared in the doorway, setting down a black equipment case beside the table. Nova Halden, the genealogist, brushed away a few droplets of rain from her jacket and glanced at the open box. "It's exactly where they left it," Kestrel said, her voice quiet, almost reverent. Untouched since the last round of testing. Nova nodded as she removed her gloves and slipped on a fresh pair. She leaned over the table, examining the zip tie with a steady gaze. "This is all they had," she murmured. 2 children missing, 2 bodies found, and this. 30 years. And this little piece of plastic might be the only part of the story that still remembers. Kestrel watched her without speaking. She had learned long ago that hope was a fragile thing in cold cases, best approached without sudden movements. Still, something about that moment, the hum of the monitor, the way the blue light caught the surface of the evidence bag felt different from the usual ritual of reopening old wounds. Nova set down a micro-swab kit and clicked open the evidence bag with deliberate care. A whisper of stale, sealed air escaped. She lifted the zip tie, holding it under the magnifying lens as the monitor sharpened its surface into crisp resolution. Small fragments of debris clung to the grooves, minuscule flecks nearly invisible. "Skin cells," she said softly. "Likely degraded, but still viable. I've seen profiles pulled from worse." Kestrel exhaled slowly, though she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. She stepped closer, her fingertips brushing the cool metal of the table rather than the evidence itself. "It survived," she whispered. "After everything." The basement lights buzzed overhead. The genealogist transferred the sample into a sterile vial, sealing it with the kind of precision that allowed no hesitation. Once locked inside, the vial seemed impossibly small, a capsule of time carrying the last remaining thread that might lead back to the person who had walked these same roads decades ago, in the same rain, under the same dim skies. Nova tucked the vial into the insulated transport case. "When this leaves this room," she said, "your case will move faster than it ever has." If there's a match, we'll know in days, Kestrel nodded. The detective's posture remained controlled, but something shifted in her expression, a faint, almost imperceptible release. For the first time since she inherited the case, she felt the ground tilt, not in confusion, but in motion. After years of static silence, the story was beginning to turn. She lifted her gaze toward the doorway as the genealogist made her way back upstairs. The building was waking now. She could hear footsteps above, the squeak of the front door, voices carrying through the halls. But down in the basement, time still felt suspended. The open evidence box, the magnified grooves of the zip tie, the hum of the monitor, they all seemed to echo a truth that had been waiting far too long. Kestrel reached into the box and lifted a small metal keyring left behind by Lucas Merritt's father years earlier. 2 keys, worn smooth by time and handling. They caught the dim light as she turned them in her hand. "Let's see where this takes us," she said quietly. Then she closed the evidence box, sealing the past once more, but no longer in darkness. To understand how this began, we go back to 1993. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe now. It helps us bring more truth to light. Before anyone knew their names from news clippings or anniversary vigils, before the word case ever shadowed their identities, Lucas Merritt and Aina Ledesma were simply 2 young people who fit into their communities with the quiet grace of routine. Their lives, like most lives, moved on ordinary tracks. Morning light through familiar windows, shared meals, inside jokes, the unspoken comfort of someone walking beside you on a path you both understood. Lucas grew up in a small Canadian suburb just across the border, in a modest house where cracked vinyl siding had been patched so many times it formed its own kind of mosaic. His father, Daniel, ran a family print shop, a narrow storefront that smelled of warm ink and paper dust. Every weekday at dawn, Lucas helped load shipment boxes, humming softly as he sorted order slips and wiped the old delivery van's fogged windshield. The van was decades old, its paint oxidized into a muted red, but Lucas treated it like a companion rather than a tool. He kept a small tin of touch-up paint under the seat and would dab at scratches in the parking lot while others smoked or waited for the next task. He was the kind of person who lingered after conversations, just long enough to make sure the other person felt heard. Teachers remembered him as the student who repaired broken classroom items without being asked. Neighbors recalled a polite wave from the driver's seat of the van, or the sound of clattering tools as he adjusted the timing belt in the driveway long after sunset. He had plans, though he rarely voiced them. Some said he wanted to expand the print shop. Others believed he hoped to travel east and photograph old towns. But the truth lived in the quiet spaces. Lucas wanted a life with room for gentleness. A life he could build day by day, with someone who understood the same language of small kindnesses. Aina was that someone. She lived a 10-minute walk from the Merritt house, down a leafy street where mailboxes leaned at different angles and gardens overflowed with untrimmed lilac bushes. Her room was a patchwork of sketches taped crookedly on the walls, portraits, comic scenes, and quick studies of strangers in cafes. Her sketchbooks were always half full, not because she abandoned them, but because every new cover felt like a new beginning. Her sister joked that Aina thought in pencil strokes. She had a habit of leaving tiny drawings for people to find. A smiling cup of coffee tucked under her mother's teapot, a quick sketch of a cat slipped into a friend's locker, a cartoon version of Lucas taped to the passenger visor of his van. It showed him gripping the steering wheel with an overly dramatic, heroic expression. He never admitted it, but that drawing stayed in the visor until the day he disappeared. Their relationship was quiet, neither forceful nor dramatic. They weren't loud teenagers filling rooms with noise. They were gentle presences, the kind that made the air softer simply by being there. Friends often saw them walking along the waterfront, sharing headphones, or laughing about something no one else could quite decipher. They spoke about small futures, not grand ones: weekend trips, shared meals, maybe renting a small place together when money allowed. The van became their shared territory. On slow afternoons, Aina would sit cross-legged in the back, sketchbook balanced on her knees, while Lucas tinkered with whatever part of the engine had started rattling that week. She drew the van from every angle, wheels slightly misaligned, bumper dented from a past delivery mishap, and the old cassette deck that occasionally swallowed tapes. In one drawing, she shaded a tiny heart on the dashboard. When Lucas found it, he smiled and pretended not to notice. But his father saw the shift in him, a quiet certainty settling into his posture. As winter approached in 1993, the print shop received word that a rare piece of equipment was finally available from a supplier near the Washington coast. It was a good opportunity, one that could change the trajectory of the business. Daniel debated going himself, but Lucas offered to make the trip. He had experience with the van, knew the routes, and didn't mind the drive. Aina decided to join him, insisting it would be a short adventure before the holidays. In the days leading up to the trip, nothing seemed unusual. They attended a small birthday dinner for a friend, bringing handmade cards and a box of pastries. Aina spent a quiet Sunday morning reorganizing her sketches, separating loose sheets into portfolios. She tucked one particular drawing, a rough outline of the van rolling down a long, winding road, into the front of her bag. When asked why she chose that one, she simply said it felt right to carry something familiar. Lucas's father remembered watching them load the van on the morning of departure. The weather was cold but clear, a rare break from the coastal rain. Lucas packed a thermos of tea, a small toolkit, and a folder containing order forms. Aina added a wool blanket and her sketchbook, sliding it into the map pocket as if it belonged there. They moved with easy coordination, each anticipating the other's motions, the rhythm of two people who had spent countless hours in shared spaces. Before they closed the doors, Daniel handed Lucas the keyring. One long silver key for the ignition, one shorter brass key for the delivery locks. He reminded them to stop at the first town after crossing the border, to check the van's oil, and to call home if the roads turned icy. Lucas nodded, slipping the keys into his jacket pocket. Aina hugged Daniel before climbing into the passenger seat. Their last conversation with him was nothing dramatic. No warning signs, no strange tension. Just an ordinary exchange between a father and his son, with the person his son loved sitting beside him. The kind of trivial moment that becomes unbearably heavy only when viewed in hindsight. As they pulled away, Lucas tapped the visor, making the cartoon drawing flutter. Aina laughed and leaned toward him, her hair brushing against the window. The van merged into light morning traffic, its rust-red body catching a brief gleam of sunlight. A neighbor reported hearing their music drifting softly through the open window. Another remembered seeing Aina waving to a dog walker as the van turned the corner. Small, forgettable details of a morning that should have led to an uneventful overnight trip and a safe return. After crossing the border, Lucas called his father from a payphone. He said the roads were clear, the weather pleasant, and the trip was going smoothly. Aina took the phone afterward, saying they'd be home by tomorrow night and that she'd bring back a new sketch something from the road. That was the last time anyone heard their voices. The timeline of what happened after Lucas and Aina crossed the border has been pieced together through receipts, interviews, and the stubborn memories of people who didn't realize they were witnessing the opening moments of a tragedy. The sequence is fragile, stitched from glimpses, but enough to draw a path that narrows toward the quiet forests of Washington state. By late morning on the day they vanished, the weather had shifted. The sky had thickened into low, bright cloud that hovered just above the tree line, diffusing the sunlight into a kind of pale glow that flattened the landscape. The two of them were seen in a roadside cafe south of the border, sharing a plate of fries and sipping tea from thick ceramic mugs. The waitress remembered them because Aina left a small drawing on the receipt of 2 coffee cups smiling at each other. It was folded neatly beneath the salt shaker when the waitress cleared the table. Just before noon, a ferry ticket was purchased at a terminal near the coastal highway. Records show the van boarding behind a red pickup carrying firewood. No one remembers the couple specifically, but one driver later said he recalled a girl sitting in the passenger seat of an older van, sketching something against the window. Nothing about the scene was suspicious. No one registered any sense of danger. What happened after they drove off that ferry is the stretch of time investigators spent decades trying to fill. The early estimates suggest they followed the route toward Raven's Ferry, planning to spend the night in a motel and pick up the print shop equipment in the morning. But at some point during the drive north, their path diverged from the predictable and slipped into the isolated network of forest roads that lace through Blackwater County. Forensic reconstruction indicates the van traveled along the main highway until dusk. The weather worsened slightly, with light mist mixing with the cooling air. Traffic thinned as they approached the logging zones. Locals avoid those side roads at night. They twist into steep hills and pockets of dense forest where radio reception dissolves. Yet the van was later found facing toward those very roads, parked on a gravel turnout less than a mile from a maintenance gate. The first discovery happened early the next morning. A trucker reported an abandoned delivery van with its rear doors ajar. He mentioned it casually during a stop at a diner, assuming it belonged to a worker who'd left it there after an overnight shift. Hours passed before another driver, uneasy about the vehicle's angle and the absence of tire tracks around it, called the sheriff's office. Deputies arrived before noon. The van sat at the edge of the turnout, its body beaded with cold moisture, the rust-red color dulled into brown under the dim daylight. The driver's window was cracked open, as if someone had attempted to air out the interior. The ignition key was missing. The interior smelled faintly of wet canvas and old coffee. On the floor near the passenger seat lay a ferry ticket, slightly crumpled, marked with the previous day's date. On the dashboard, a single page torn from a sketchbook rested in a thin layer of dust. It showed an unfinished line drawing of a landscape that might have been imagined or real. The strokes ended abruptly halfway through a contour. The back of the van showed more subtle tension. The cargo area was tidier than expected, as though someone had moved items around. A wool blanket was balled in the corner. 2 coffee cups from a coastal cafe lay on their sides, one still bearing a fingerprint smudge. A carton of paper supplies had been pushed up against the wall. And in the corner, nearly sliding beneath the wheel well, was a nylon zip tie, its surface marked by faint ridges, one end slightly stretched. It appeared out of place, too industrial for the van's contents, too deliberate to be accidental. At this point, the deputies still believed the couple had simply wandered off. They canvassed the area, called hospitals, reached out to the border, and contacted nearby motels. No sign of Lucas or Anna surfaced. The van was towed to the sheriff's lot, the contents cataloged with routine precision. For several hours, no one suspected anything worse than an abandoned vehicle. The second discovery shattered that illusion. The following afternoon, 2 hunters were walking along a service trail that ran beneath a weathered concrete bridge several miles from the turnout. The trail wound through thick ferns and clusters of cedar trees, where the ground was soft with moss. They noticed a shape near the base of the embankment. At first, they thought it was discarded clothing or a camping tarp. As they approached, the shape became unmistakably human. The body lay on its side near the shadow of the bridge. The clothing was disheveled, and the air around the site was still, heavy with the dampness that clings to river valleys. One of the hunters turned away quickly. The other ran back toward the road to find help. Deputies from Blackwater County responded within the hour. The area was cordoned off with measured but uneasy silence. The forensic techs approached the scene with practiced detachment. The temperature had dropped, and a thin mist curled along the riverbank. Nearby, a black shoe rested partially submerged in muddy water, a few feet from where the body had been found. The discovery confirmed the worst fears about the couple from the van. The body was identified as Anna. Her sister later confirmed the clothing. The investigators searched the surrounding area for anything that might explain how she arrived there. On a cluster of wet leaves beneath the bridge, they found impressions matching the tread of heavy work boots. These prints overlapped with the faint outlines of lighter shoes, possibly belonging to Anna. The proximity of the prints to the embankment suggested movement toward the river, but the trail ended abruptly where the soil turned to stone. A single earring was found near a tree root, likely pulled loose during a struggle. A button, matching the color of Anna's jacket, was discovered 5 yards away. Both items were bagged, but neither at the time offered anything beyond a map of how chaotic those final moments must have been. Investigators widened their search, uncertain whether Lucas had fled, been taken, or was lying somewhere unseen. Search dogs, volunteers, and deputies combed the forest roads for days. Helicopter sweeps covered the river's twists and curves. Nothing appeared. The case deepened into confusion. Both families were contacted and urged to remain hopeful, though the investigators carried their own private doubts. It wasn't until a week later that the third discovery was made. A fisherman working the Blackwater River noticed something caught against a tangle of driftwood near a bend downstream. The river was slow-moving at that time of year, but strong enough to pull debris into clusters where branches reached into the current. When he approached, he realized the shape was not driftwood at all. The recovery was slow and somber. The riverbank soil gave way in soft patches, forcing deputies to anchor themselves with ropes tied around nearby trunks. The silence of the scene left a lasting impression on those present. After a short visual assessment, the identification matched the missing young man. Lucas had been found. The condition of the body aligned with the timeline of disappearance. Items found on him included his wallet, a broken watch, and a single brass key from the 2-key ring he had carried. The other key, the ignition key, was missing. His jacket pockets contained only lint and a torn Ferry stub, the date still visible. A deeper forensic sweep of the area uncovered tire impressions on a dirt slope upstream. The tread patterns did not belong to the delivery van. Nearby branches showed signs of recent breakage, as if a vehicle had backed abruptly into the brush. Investigators believed whoever brought him there did so under the cover of night, using knowledge of the surrounding roads to avoid detection. The lack of footprints along the bank added to the uncertainty. Rain had washed away much of the surface disturbances, leaving behind only vague depressions that were too distorted to analyze. But one detail remained puzzling: a cigarette butt wedged between 2 stones near the waterline. It was waterlogged and useless for immediate testing, but its presence felt oddly deliberate. Later, it would disappear from the narrative almost entirely, overshadowed by more crucial findings. Yet for years, it remained in the evidence box as an unresolved fragment, a remnant of someone who lingered near the river long enough to smoke before leaving. Back at the van's discovery site, investigators conducted another sweep. They noted the van's position facing the forest road, its rear doors partially open, and the absence of any obvious signs of struggle. Inside, beneath the seat, they found the second zip tie. This one was coiled loosely, unstretched. Its placement suggested it had been dropped or slipped out of a pocket. At the time, it was cataloged with little urgency. The van keys, which had been in Lucas's possession when he last spoke with his father, were nowhere to be found at either scene. Their disappearance became one of the case's early mysteries. Why take the ignition key? Why leave the brass key? Why abandon the van so close to accessible roads? No single explanation satisfied all the inconsistencies. The final unexplained detail came from the map pocket on the passenger door. When the van was first searched, it held only a few folded pamphlets. Yet during a secondary inspection, a torn page from Anna's sketchbook was discovered trapped deeper inside, as if it had been shoved or fallen there in haste. The drawing was incomplete, a rough outline of a road that curved into forest shadows. Whether she had been drawing moments before everything changed, or whether it was merely a page left behind earlier, remained unknown. The torn edge suggested it had been ripped abruptly. That detail stayed with the lead investigator long after the initial evidence was logged. It hinted at a moment of interruption, a fracture in the quiet life they had built together. And it marked the point where the investigation shifted from uncertainty to grim certainty. Only later, when forensic methods evolved, would investigators understand how crucial the zip tie found in the van truly was. But at that early stage, it was simply another item in a growing list of clues pulled from the rain-soaked world the couple had passed through in their final hours. In the first weeks after the discovery of Lucas and Anna, detectives from Blackwater County divided the investigation into sections. One team handled the van, another the river site, and a third the bridge embankment. The early days were a blur of interviews, terrain maps, and hurried hypotheses. Everything felt urgent, as though answers were hiding just beyond the next ridge or under the next logbook entry. But urgency is a fragile resource, and it thins quickly when facts refuse to assemble into any coherent shape. The first promising lead appeared less than a month after the bodies were found. A logger working night shifts claimed he had seen a man walking along the service road near where the van was abandoned. He described the figure as tall, wearing a dark jacket, moving strangely as if carrying something heavy. Investigators searched the area again, hoping to link the sighting to tire tracks or boot prints. They found neither. When questioned further, the logger admitted he had been exhausted that night. His recollection of the figure blurred under scrutiny, shifting in height and direction. Eventually, he conceded that the figure could have been an animal, or even a shadow thrown from his own truck lights. The lead dissolved. A week later, a gas station attendant called with urgency. She insisted she had seen a young couple arguing with a stranger near the pumps the night of the disappearance. She described him as restless, pacing between vehicles. Investigators drove to the station, reviewed the attendant's log, and interviewed several customers who were there that evening. Not one recalled an argument. The attendant's manager suggested she tended to fill in the blanks when stressed. Another dead end. The county sheriff's office began receiving calls from people who believed they had seen the van earlier than reported, or had passed a man hitchhiking in the area. Some leads contradicted each other so directly that detectives joked grimly about people remembering scenes they wished they had witnessed. Others seemed earnest but impossible to confirm. Interviews stretched into late nights. Coffee cups multiplied across desks. Files swelled with statements that all pointed in different directions. For the families, these scattered fragments of attention felt indistinguishable from progress. Every call created a small flare of hope. Daniel Merritt drove to the sheriff's office almost weekly, carrying new theories he had pieced together from radio reports or tips passed along by strangers. He brought maps with pinned routes, circled areas where he believed the killer might have turned off the main road, and articles about similar crimes in other states. Detectives listened respectfully, but privately they knew none of it had moved the investigation forward. Anna's family struggled quietly, almost inwardly. Her mother rarely spoke during meetings with detectives. She tended to trace the outlines of the coffee cup in front of her, nodding when prompted, keeping her eyes down. Her sister, younger and more outspoken, often pushed for clearer answers. How could two people just vanish that completely? She asked during one meeting. Someone had to have seen something. 6 months into the investigation, attention shifted to a drifter who had been seen camping along the riverbank. He had a history of petty theft and trespassing, and when approached by deputies, he reacted with agitation. A search of his campsite revealed a collection of mismatched belongings, some scavenged from abandoned barns, others taken from roadside dumpsters. Among them was a jacket button similar in size to one found near Anna's body. For 3 tense days, detectives believed they had found their suspect. The button, however, was traced back to a discarded coat recovered from a dump site miles away. Nothing else at the campsite linked him to the crime. Under questioning, the man was incoherent, weaving stories about voices in the woods and people watching him from treetops. His statements veered into delusion and had no factual footing. He was released, and the case lost one of its few tangible possibilities. A year passed. Then, too, the case remained open but increasingly stagnant. Forensic capacities at the time could not extract a full DNA profile from the samples on the zip tie or the clothing. Every test returned partial strands lacking the resolution necessary to compare against existing databases. The science was simply not ready. Each failure deepened the frustration. Detectives rotated through shifts, some eventually moving on to other departments. New officers inherited pieces of the case, but few had the time or resources to rebuild its labyrinth of dead leads. Reports were updated periodically, mostly with notes indicating no new findings. During the third year, media attention reignited briefly when a television segment aired about unsolved crimes in the region. Reporters visited Raven's Ferry, interviewing locals about the bridge where Aina was found and the river bend where Lucas surfaced. The coverage portrayed the town as haunted, steeped in mystery. Residents resented the implication. Shop owners complained that the segment scared away tourists. Loggers grumbled that the media exaggerated everything. But the renewed attention did bring several new tips to the sheriff's office. One caller claimed to have overheard a man bragging about knowing what happened at a bar near the coast. Investigators followed up, interviewing the man in question. He denied making the claim. Witnesses contradicted one another. Some said he had been drunk. Others insisted he merely repeated rumors circulating at the time. Nothing concrete emerged. Another caller, a retired hotel manager, said she recognized Aina from her time working in the area. She believed the girl had stayed in one of the motel rooms the night before the bodies were found. When investigators checked the old registry, the pages were smudged with water damage. The name written on the line she referenced was not Aina's, though the handwriting was barely legible. It could have been anyone. The lead evaporated. The families endured these cycles of hope and disappointment with quiet exhaustion. Daniel Merritt, who once arrived weekly with maps and theories, began to appear less often. He still carried the van's spare keys in his pocket, a small talisman of the last day he saw his son. But his voice grew frail during meetings. His requests for updates became softer, almost resigned. He attended community vigils where candles flickered along the riverbank, though he rarely spoke. His grief settled into the kind of silence that absorbs itself into the body. Aina's mother retreated further. She started keeping her daughter's sketchbooks in sealed boxes, as if protecting them from the erosion of time. Each anniversary brought a tightening in her posture and a sorrow that could be felt by anyone near her. Her younger daughter, now entering adulthood, took on the role of spokesperson for the family. She attended interviews, answered journalists, and wrote letters to lawmakers asking for renewed attention to cold case resources. Her determination became a quiet force, though it carried the sharp edges of frustration. By the late 90s, the investigation had stalled enough that the sheriff's office quietly reduced active resources assigned to it. The case was not closed. It simply sat in a cabinet, labeled with the year and the names of two young people whose futures had ended before they could begin. Detectives still reviewed it occasionally, but the attention was sporadic, peripheral. A new generation of officers entered the department knowing the case only through rumor. Every few years, another possible suspect emerged. In 2001, a man arrested in a neighboring county for an unrelated assault was briefly considered. He matched a description provided by a witness claiming to have seen someone near the van. But his alibi for the night of the disappearance held up, and physical evidence ruled him out. In 2004, a cold case investigator from another state contacted Blackwater County about similarities between this case and one in his jurisdiction. The cases shared surface traits: abandoned vehicles, isolated locations, young couples. But DNA evidence from his scene did not match the partial strands from the zip tie. The connection unraveled. Through these years, the families continued to live in the shadow of unanswered questions. The annual remembrance walks in their hometown grew quieter each time. Attendance dropped as people moved away or chose to grieve in private. The van remained in an impound lot for months before being released to a salvage yard. Daniel could not bring himself to claim it. He said the van had become too heavy to look at, as if the sight of its rusted surface pressed on his chest. The salvage yard crushed it with other scrap during a routine clearance. Only the keyring remained. By 2010, DNA testing had advanced enough to revisit the samples. A forensic lab attempted a more sophisticated extraction using improved technology. Once again, the results were incomplete. Detectives logged the update and returned the evidence box to storage. The disappointment clung to the department like humidity. When asked by a reporter about the status of the investigation, an officer replied with tired honesty, "We have what we have. And what we have doesn't talk." It became the unofficial sentiment around the case. Evidence that didn't speak. Scenes that couldn't reconstruct themselves. A crime without a clear narrative. The file began appearing less frequently on desks. New cases replaced old ones. People retired. Memories shifted. Some in the town believed the couple had stumbled into something random. Others whispered darker theories involving long-haul drivers or transient workers. For many, the story became a cautionary tale, repeated with varying accuracy. In the sheriff's office, Detective Maren Kestrel inherited the case years later. She approached it with the disciplined objectivity of someone who understood both the weight and the limitations of cold cases. She reviewed every page, re-examined every photograph, and re-walked the locations where the bodies were found. Each time, she felt a faint pull toward clarity, but the evidence remained stubbornly unchanged. Eventually, after nearly 3 decades of missteps, mismatched leads, and procedural fatigue, the case folder was placed in the cold case cabinet, marked with a thin strip of tape. The edges were worn. The ink was faded. The box fit neatly beside others that had also slipped through the cracks of time. The final note added that year was short, written without embellishment. Pending further technological advancement, and for a long time nothing happened. Nothing at all. Time does strange things to grief. It never disappears, and it never fully heals. It simply changes shape, settling into the corners of life like dust that refuses to be swept away. For the families of Lucas Merritt and Aina Ledesma, the years drifted past in a blur of seasons, each one carrying the quiet ache of 2 young lives left unfinished. For Lucas's father, Daniel, the early years were marked by movement. He couldn't stay still, couldn't sit in the same room for long, couldn't look at the spot where his son once kept his work boots by the door. He walked miles through the neighborhood, wearing down the soles of his shoes. Neighbors would see him pacing the sidewalks at dusk, hands in his pockets, head bowed as if straining to hear an echo of footsteps that should have still been there. He kept the van's spare keys in a small wooden dish by the front entryway. Each time his hand passed over them, he felt the cold metal press into his palm like a pulse from another time. He promised himself he would never move them. As the years passed, the wooden dish gathered dust, the keys tarnished slightly, but they remained exactly where he had placed them the day the sheriff told him the van had been found without his son inside. Sometimes he wrote letters to Lucas, simple ones the way a father writes when he doesn't know who else to speak to. He wrote about the weather, about the shop, about holidays they would never share again. He folded the letters and placed them in a box beside the keys. By the time a decade had passed, the box was nearly full. Aina's mother grieved differently. She spoke less, but she kept everything. Every drawing Aina left behind was stored in labeled envelopes, tucked into plastic sleeves to protect them from fading. She kept the mugs Aina loved, the ones with the chipped rims and the sweater with the missing cuff button. She kept the receipt from the cafe the day before the trip, still faintly smelling of ink. Her home became a museum of small details, as if she were curating the world her daughter left behind. Her younger daughter, Mira, grew older in the long shadow of that loss. She learned to navigate the house quietly, to move around the sealed boxes without disturbing them. For years she felt like she was living beside a closed door she was not allowed to open. When she reached adulthood, she began opening it anyway. She started by rereading old case summaries printed from the sheriff's office website. She marked dates and reconstructed the timeline the way an investigator might, finding the gaps, circling unanswered questions. She visited the bridge where her sister was found, leaving flowers every year on the same day, even when rain soaked the petals and softened them into the soil. She wrote to local newspapers asking them to revisit the story. During anniversaries, she introduced herself to reporters lingering at the scene, offering family anecdotes her mother could no longer bring herself to share. Over time, other voices joined hers. Journalists who specialized in long-form crime reporting found the case compelling. They visited Raven's Ferry, described the empty van in the river, and the sketchbook page that had been torn in haste. Their articles captured national attention for a brief moment. But attention is fickle. Newer tragedies pushed older ones off the front page. The cold case faded back into silence. The years continued their slow march. The river at Blackwater changed shape slightly, eating away at one bank and depositing silt along the other. The bridge was reinforced with new concrete, covering the cracks that had once framed the spot where Aina lay. The gravel turnout where the van was found was widened to accommodate maintenance vehicles. To most people, these were improvements, progress, necessary adjustments for a growing region. To the families, they were erasures, small acts of time, making it harder to remember the exact contours of a place where their world had broken. Daniel's body weakened with age. Knees that once carried him through long delivery routes now struggled with stairs. Still, he made his pilgrimage to the river every year, sitting on a bench installed by volunteers after the case gained renewed attention. He stared at the water, listening to its slow churn. People passing by often didn't recognize him. To them, he was simply an older man keeping to himself, unaware that the weight he carried was invisible but immense. One winter, after a particularly heavy storm, Daniel's shop closed permanently. He couldn't sustain the business alone anymore. He boxed the remaining supplies, locked the door with the same brass key Lucas once used, and walked away without looking back. The sign bearing the Merrick name faded over the next several seasons until it became almost illegible. Mira entered her 30s with a fierce sense of mission. She became the primary voice for both families, attending every vigil, contacting every detective who inherited the case. She learned how departments rotated staff, how evidence was stored, how to file information requests. Some officers gently explained that the technology needed for a full DNA match simply didn't exist yet. Others advised her to manage her expectations. A few suggested that, with so much time passed, maybe closure was impossible. She ignored those suggestions. Instead, she kept pushing. She visited the impound lot where the van had been stored decades earlier. She walked the perimeter fence, imagining what it looked like before it was crushed. She touched the links of the chain fence, feeling the cold bite of the metal on her fingertips, as if the memory of the van still hovered in the air, rust fading into ghostly outline. Across the border, Daniel kept his own vigil in quieter ways. He visited the box of letters periodically, reading through them, even though he had written each line himself. His handwriting varied markedly over the years, steady in the beginning, trembling in later seasons. He often paused at letters he couldn't remember writing, as if he were reading someone else's confession of sorrow. When he reached the final page, he would fold it with slow care and place it back into the box atop the others. Time continued to pass. The late 90s drifted into the early 2000s. Technology leapt forward. Emails replaced letters, digital photos replaced film, and genealogy databases, once an obscure hobby, started compiling enormous networks of familial connection. But for years, none of this reached the families in any meaningful way. Their loss remained analog, restrained within old evidence bags and yellowing files. The sheriff's office held occasional case reviews, inviting experts to assess whether new methods might apply. Each time, hope flared briefly. Each time the answer was the same. The DNA was too degraded, the samples too thin. Maybe the next decade would bring better options. Maybe not. Mira, increasingly aware of the passage of time, began speaking at community events focused on victims' families. Her voice carried a mixture of sorrow and resolve. She spoke not only about loss, but about the patience required to live inside an unanswered question for nearly 30 years. During an event held at a community center, she spotted Detective Marin Kestrel in the audience, listening quietly among the crowd. After the presentation, Marin approached her, introduced herself, and asked about the family's experience. Their conversation stretched far into the evening. Marin left with a renewed sense of responsibility. She recognized the case file from her training days, but had never fully understood the emotional core that lived beneath its procedural layers. Now she did. And once she understood, she couldn't put the file away again. Meanwhile, Daniel's health faded. The walks grew shorter, the letters slow. His voice weakened, and the few remaining friends in his circle became accustomed to speaking on his behalf. Yet the keyring remained in the wooden dish. Even when his memory faltered, his hand instinctively drifted toward those keys. As if the act of holding them anchored him to a part of himself, he refused to surrender. Years passed in this suspended rhythm. Seasons blurred, roads widened, technology advanced. And somewhere in the shifting landscape of forensic science, a quiet possibility began to form, though no one could yet name it. One evening, after Mira finished speaking at a cold case awareness event, a young genealogist approached her. She had attended out of curiosity, drawn by stories of families waiting decades for answers. She introduced herself politely, then hesitated before choosing her words. "If the original samples still exist," she said, "there are new techniques now. They're experimental, but people are starting to use them to reconstruct partial DNA profiles. Even very old cases might qualify." Mira felt the smallest shift inside, a subtle, careful flicker of something she had not dared to feel in years. Not certainty, not relief, but the faint outline of possibility taking shape where silence once lived. She asked the genealogist for details, every question deliberate. The woman explained the process in cautious terms, noting the limitations, the cost, the complexity. Mira listened with an intensity sharpened by decades of waiting. When the woman finished, Mira thanked her, exchanged contact information, and stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky was cloudless, the first clear evening after weeks of rain. She pulled out her phone and dialed the sheriff's office. She didn't know exactly what would come next, but she knew the direction the story needed to move in. The phone rang twice before a deputy answered. "I'd like to talk to Detective Kestrel," she said. "It's about my sister's case." At that moment, the long stretch of stagnant years began to shift again, almost imperceptibly, but enough to breathe life into a file that had gathered dust for far too long. "Where are you watching from tonight? Drop an emoji in the comments." When the evidence box was carried out of storage and placed on a clean metal table under new fluorescent lights, it felt as if something dormant had stirred. The cardboard was soft at the edges, its tape yellowed, its label fading into the brown surface. Yet inside it lay the same items that had baffled investigators for years, preserved with the stubborn patience of objects that had simply waited for the world to catch up to them. Detective Marin Kestrel stood beside the table with her arms crossed, watching a forensic technician unpack the box. They moved slowly, handling each piece with the same care given to ancient artifacts. The objects were familiar: the torn sketchbook page, the ferry ticket, the wool blanket, the two mismatched coffee cups. None of these could do more than confirm a journey already known. Then the technician reached the bottom of the box and lifted the sealed evidence bag containing the nylon zip tie. It looked almost unchanged from the first time it was logged. Translucent plastic, ridged surface, one end crimped into a locked loop. It bore no visible fingerprints, no stains or markings. Yet it held something that, at the time, investigators lacked the tools to fully interpret. Marin stepped forward. "That's where the last partial DNA came from," she said quietly. Nova Halden, the genealogist, nodded as she slipped on fresh gloves. She had returned after weeks of communication with the department, each conversation carrying the gravity of possibility. "The process is better now," she said. "We can pull fragments from samples this degraded. If there's even a trace of a genome, the system can infer the missing pieces." There was an understated confidence in her voice, not optimism, but precision. The kind of confidence reserved for people who have seen the impossible become routine through science. The zip tie was unsealed under controlled airflow. Under magnification, its ridges appeared like miniature hills and valleys, each one capable of trapping microscopic residue. The forensic team collected the sample with a microswab, which they sealed immediately into a vial. Every movement was slow, deliberate, without the slightest tremor. No one spoke while the vial was transferred into the insulated transport case. The silence felt ceremonial. When the sample arrived at the State Forensic Laboratory, it entered a world built around the meticulous curation of truth. Machines hummed softly along the walls. Analysts in sterile coats logged entries into databases with the steady discipline of surgeons. The initial extraction took hours. DNA fragments are not like words on a page. They are more like torn syllables of a language that must be reconstructed piece by piece. The technician overseeing the extraction watched the first series of markers appear on her screen. They were faint, incomplete, but promising. Then the deeper sequencing began. Next-generation sequencing machines read the fragments in overlapping cycles, building a lattice of genetic components. The system filled gaps by comparing the surviving fragments to a vast reference library. Slowly, a portrait formed, not fully intact, but detailed enough to suggest gender, genetic ancestry, and distant familial relations. The technician leaned closer. "We have depth," she murmured, then repeated the words with more conviction. "We have depth." Within hours, Nova was called to the lab. She arrived with her laptop, ready to begin the genealogical reconstruction. When she saw the results, her breath caught. "This is more than I expected," she said. "There's enough here to build from." The DNA was uploaded to a public genealogy database used for cold case analysis. The response was immediate. Distant cousin matches appeared first, individuals sharing small percentages of DNA spread across multiple states. Then the matches grew closer, a potential second cousin. A branching cluster forming along a specific surname, Ward. Nova's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she charted the relationships. She constructed a family tree starting from the earliest shared ancestors, layering generations of marriages, births, and migrations. Each connection narrowed the search, tightening around a line that kept circling back to the same region of Washington. Marin watched in quiet amazement. After nearly 30 years of silence, this was the first time she saw the case move with purpose. Nova drew a box around the final branch, a cluster of male descendants who had lived within driving distance of Raven's Ferry at the time of the murders. Among them, one stood out. Elliot Ward, born 1964, former long-haul driver. History of seasonal logging jobs in Blackwater County. No significant criminal record. Moved houses several times, but always along the same routes that split off from the Forest Service roads. He had once lived less than 3 miles from where the van was abandoned. For a moment, the room fell still. The genealogical map glowed faintly on the screen, its branching lines converging like threads of an old tapestry, finally revealing the figure at its center. "We need a direct sample," Marin said. The next step required precision of a different kind. Surveillance officers monitored Ward's routine for days, observing his movements without alerting him. He visited the same truck stop every morning, ordered the same coffee, smoked the same brand of cigarettes. On the 4th day, after he disposed of a paper cup and a napkin, Detectives collected the items from the trash bin and sealed them in evidence bags. Laboratory testing confirmed the match. The DNA from the coffee cup aligned with the profile recovered from the zip tie, matching at every viable marker. The probability of coincidence was so infinitesimal, it was effectively zero. Marin held the confirmation report in her hands. She traced her finger along the printed lines, overwhelmed by the stark clarity of the result. Not because it solved everything, but because it transformed decades of unanswered questions into a path forward. She notified the families immediately. Daniel listened quietly as she explained the findings. When she finished, he reached for the wooden dish by the door. His hand closed around the van keys, the metal cool and familiar against his skin. He pressed them into his palm, as if grounding himself in the final moment of his son's life, which he could now imagine with less uncertainty. He didn't speak, but the faint tremor of his shoulders revealed everything. Across town, Mira received the news with a mixture of relief and disbelief. For years she had pushed, asked, demanded that the case be reopened. Now the answer was in her hands. She stepped outside, into the same street where she once played with her sister. For a long time she didn't move. She simply stood there, letting the weight of the revelation settle through her. Raven's Ferry reacted slowly at first. A rumor here, a whispered speculation there. Then the name spread. Some remembered Ward vaguely as the quiet man who kept to himself. Others said they saw him at the logging yard or passing through town. No one had ever suspected him. The idea that he had lived among them, unnoticed, unsettled everyone. In the sheriff's office, Marin added the updated report to the once stagnant evidence file. The zip tie, once a meaningless piece of plastic, had become the fulcrum of the entire investigation. It had carried the truth across decades, waiting for the moment when technology could translate its silent imprint. With the genealogical map complete, the direct match confirmed, and the timeline aligning with Ward's movements, the investigators prepared the arrest. Justice, once frozen, had begun to move again. Hit the like button if you believe justice always finds its way. The morning the arrest team assembled, the town of Raven's Ferry stirred under low clouds. A cool wind pushed through the valley, carrying the scent of wet cedar and exhaust from early commuter traffic. Officers gathered quietly at the edge of a modest residential street, where a house sat behind an overgrown hedge. The windows reflected the pale sky, hiding whatever movements took place inside. Detective Marin Kestrel stood near the back of the group, watching the house with a calm she had practiced for years. She raised her hand when the team was ready. The moment had the weight of accumulated time behind it, decades of silence, unanswered questions, evidence preserved through the stubborn patience of those who refused to let the case disappear. When officers approached the door, there was no commotion. A knock, firm but controlled. A pause, then the door opened a fraction. Elliot Ward, older now with a face weathered from long-haul years, looked at the badges in front of him without visible alarm. It was unclear whether he understood what was happening, or whether he had spent too many years expecting this moment to arrive. They read the warrant. They placed him in handcuffs. He offered no resistance, only a faint frown as if the inconvenience surprised him more than the accusation. Neighbors watched from driveways and windows as he was led to the waiting vehicle. Some whispered. Others stared, trying to reconcile the quiet man they had known with the name now spoken by officers in subdued, steady tones. Marin remained outside for a moment after the car pulled away. She studied the house, the small porch cluttered with empty planters, the blinds tilted in uneven angles. It was a place where someone had lived for years without drawing attention. Now it was a place marked permanently by the end of a long search. The drive back to the sheriff's office was quiet. The officers in the car watched Ward through the rearview mirror. He kept his eyes forward, expression unreadable, as though the motion of being taken into custody did little to disturb whatever life he had constructed in the shadows of the past. During the initial questioning, he spoke little. He denied knowing Lucas or Anna. He denied being at the van turnout. denied traveling those forest roads, denied any involvement in their deaths. He answered every question with the same tone, flat, detached, almost bored. But the certainty of science stood beside every denial. The DNA match was absolute, an anchor the investigation would not drift from. When presented with the genealogical chart showing the family connections that led to him, he stared at the diagram without comment. His silence became its own confirmation, an empty space where explanation should have lived. The trial was scheduled after months of preparatory hearings. Word spread quickly through Raven's Ferry and the surrounding counties. People who remembered the case from their youth came forward, some attending every session, others simply wanting to witness the long-awaited resolution. Reporters returned, their notes and equipment now more advanced than the ones carried by their predecessors nearly 3 decades earlier. On the morning of the trial, the courthouse filled slowly. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of anticipation. Dust motes drifted through beams of cold light filtering down from high windows. The atmosphere held a tightness, a tension pulled across the room like a thin wire. Lucas's father, Daniel, was escorted to a seat near the front. His steps were slow, but he held himself upright, supported by years of quiet endurance. In his jacket pocket, he carried the van keys, wrapped in a soft cloth to keep them from clinking. His hand rested over the pocket often, as if reassured by the familiar weight. Ana's sister Mira sat beside her mother. Mira had become a voice for both families, the one who spoke at vigils, contacted detectives, and wrote letters demanding progress. She sat with her shoulders squared, eyes focused on the front of the room, her breath steady. Her mother held a folded tissue in her hand, pressing its edges together. When the judge entered, the room stilled. When Ward was brought in, all eyes turned toward him. Older now, he carried himself with a posture that suggested neither remorse nor defiance, but a kind of vacancy. He avoided looking at the families. He kept his focus on the table in front of him, where legal documents rested in neat stacks. The prosecution began by outlining the timeline of the investigation, decades of dead ends, the limitations of early forensic technology, the persistence that eventually reopened the case. They described the van, the river, the bridge. They spoke of the degraded DNA and the improbability of retrieving anything useful from samples that had sat in storage for nearly 30 years. Then they explained how that improbability became possible. The forensic analyst took the stand, describing the sequencing process with the calm precision of someone accustomed to translating scientific complexity into human terms. She spoke of degraded fragments reassembled through overlapping patterns, of genealogical matches aligning across generations, of the direct confirmation from the coffee cup discarded at the truck stop. The courtroom listened with held breath. Each sentence seemed to pull the past into the present, tying old evidence to new certainty. Next, Nova Halden testified. She explained the genealogical map, the long chain of ancestral lines that led directly to Ward. She moved through her testimony carefully, aware that the weight of her words was immense. The diagram she referenced had shifted the investigation onto its final course. The clarity of its intersections was impossible to ignore. The defense attempted to raise doubts. They pointed to the age of the evidence, the potential for contamination decades earlier, the complexity of genealogical mapping. But each argument faltered under the strength of the DNA match. The science was meticulous, its conclusions unwavering. When Ward was asked whether he wished to speak, he declined. His refusal left the courtroom with an emptiness that felt both deliberate and hollow. It was as though he understood that nothing he could say would change the weight of what had been revealed. After closing arguments, the jury withdrew. Hours passed. People left for meals, returned with coffee, shifted in their seats, whispered updates into phones. Through it all, Daniel and Mira remained where they were, anchored by the expectation that this time, after years of silence, there would be a resolution. When the jury filed back in, the room grew still again. The foreperson stood, holding the verdict slip with both hands. Guilty. guilty on all counts. The words carried across the courtroom with a clarity that felt almost physical. Mira closed her eyes briefly, a slow exhale escaping her. Her mother pressed the tissue to her lips, shaking with emotion. Daniel bowed his head, the keys in his pocket pressing against his palm, grounding him in a moment that felt both devastating and necessary. Ward offered no reaction. His face remained blank, as though the verdict passed through him without landing. After the courtroom emptied, Marin approached the families quietly. She did not offer platitudes or promises. She simply told them that the truth had been found and that their perseverance had made it possible. Daniel reached out, placing a gentle hand on her arm. He didn't need to speak. The gratitude in his eyes carried more weight than any words could. Outside the courthouse, the sky remained overcast, but the air felt different. People gathered in small groups, murmuring about the verdict, reflecting on the decades that had passed since the case first shocked their community. Some expressed relief, others sadness. But everyone agreed on one thing. Justice had finally arrived, carried forward not by chance or confession, but by the enduring imprint of evidence preserved through time. Mira stood on the courthouse steps for a long while, absorbing the quiet around her. She imagined her sister at that age, full of laughter and sketches and small acts of kindness. In her pocket, she kept one of Aina's early drawings, a tiny sketch of a winding road disappearing into a forest. She touched the folded paper, feeling its soft edges, and allowed herself a moment of stillness. Justice is not the restoration of what was lost, she thought. It is simply the acknowledgement that their lives mattered enough to keep searching. Behind her, Marin stepped outside, letting the cool air settle around her after a long, heavy day. She watched the families for a moment, then turned her gaze toward the distant tree line where the case had begun. She felt a sense of completion, not triumphant, but calm. The story that had lingered in her mind for years had finally found its conclusion. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the courthouse lights flickered on, casting a soft glow across the stone steps. The river beyond the town kept flowing, unchanged by the verdict, but somehow quieter, as if the valley itself had exhaled after holding its breath for nearly 3 decades. The truth, once buried under time and uncertainty, had finally surfaced. And though it could not heal every wound, it offered something the families had been denied for too long: the clarity to move forward. In the months following the verdict, life in Raven's Ferry settled into a quieter rhythm. The story that once echoed across the valley finally found a place to rest, no longer circling through unanswered questions. People went back to their routines, yet something subtle had shifted. The lingering heaviness that once hovered over conversations about the case had eased, replaced by an understanding that the truth, however delayed, had emerged from the shadows. For Lucas's father, Daniel, the change came in small steps. He no longer kept the blinds drawn during winter mornings. He opened the windows more often, letting the cool, cedar-scented air drift through the rooms. The wooden dish beside the door still held the van keys, but he no longer gripped them out of habit or sorrow. Instead, he touched them with a gentleness that suggested a different kind of memory, one shaped not by the moment his son vanished, but by the years they had shared before it. The keys remained a reminder, but not a burden. Aina's family found their own path forward. Her mother began taking slow walks through the neighborhood, often pausing at the park where Aina used to sketch strangers on benches. Mira accompanied her at first, ready to steady her if she faltered. But as the seasons passed, her mother grew more confident, sometimes continuing the walk alone. She did not speak often, but she carried one of Aina's drawings folded carefully in her coat pocket. It was a simple sketch of a shoreline, with a winding road that faded into open space. She kept it close not to hold on to grief, but because it made her feel near her daughter in a way words never could. Mira's life opened in new directions. She stayed involved with advocacy groups for cold case families, offering the kind of guidance she once desperately needed herself. She believed that sharing their story, from the disappearance to the decades of silence to the breakthrough, might help someone else endure their own long wait for answers. When she spoke at events, she held herself differently now, grounded by something steadier than determination. It was a kind of peace, gentle but unmistakable. Detective Maren Kestrel continued her work, though the Merit Ledesma case remained a quiet presence in her mind. On evenings when the office grew still, she sometimes revisited the bridge or the riverbank, not to search for anything, but to acknowledge the landscape that had shaped the investigation. She understood now that justice was not a clean or swift process. It was slow, layered, and often fragile, but still worth pursuing even when the outcome felt distant. One afternoon, months after the verdict, Maren visited the evidence storage room. She unlocked the cabinet where the box once sat, though it had since been moved to long-term records. The shelf was empty now, but she stood in front of it for a moment, remembering the first time she opened the box and saw the zip tie that had quietly carried the truth for nearly 3 decades. The evidence had spoken long after the voices connected to it were gone. It was a reminder that time does not erase everything. Sometimes it preserves exactly what matters. Outside the building, winter light reflected softly on the wet pavement. Maren stepped into the chill and breathed in the scent of rain and fir trees. For a moment, the wind shifted, and she imagined the rust-red van traveling down the highway all those years ago, carrying 2 young people laughing about something small and joyful. That memory, constructed from stories, sketches, and the echoes of those who loved them, felt almost real, suspended in the air like a quiet blessing. The story of Lucas and Anna no longer lived solely in police files or news archives. It lived in the resilience of their families, in the diligence of investigators who refused to give up, and in the breakthroughs that science made possible. It lived in every person who learned from their case that justice may wait, but it does not disappear. As spring began to settle over Blackwater County, the river ran high with melting snow. The water moved steadily, clearing old branches away, creating new paths through the valley. People walked the river trails again. Children played along the banks. And those who knew the story felt comfort in knowing that even places marked by tragedy could return to gentler rhythms. Justice had not undone the loss, but it had given the family something they had been denied for too long: the assurance that truth endures. And in that truth, a quiet kind of redemption found its place. Which case should we tell next? Leave your suggestion below.